want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. I gotta be honest, I've spent the day fuming. I've spent the day angry. I've spent the day frustrated. I've spent the day wanting to hit people. I'll be honest with you. It's rare that I have days like today. It's rare that I am this worked up about something that I read. But I gotta question, who are we as a country? Who are we as a people? Who are we as Americans? Who are we in the richest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment? When I read in USA Today that the Louisiana Department of Health is sending 37,000 nursing home patients, nursing home residents, eviction notices. Stop and think about that for just 1 second. The most vulnerable of the most vulnerable, 37,000 people who built this country, 37,000 people who fought our wars, 37,000 people who raised children, who supported this country. We are virtually saying, screw you, there's the curb. Good luck. I hear Uber's hiring. It all comes back down to the Medicaid cuts. Understand, Medicaid is the largest government program by far, because it is, and I've said this for years, we have a long-term health insurance program in this country. A lot of folks, are worried about when they retire, if they run out of money, where are they going to go? Medicaid is that safety net. Medicaid is that place that says, you know what? If you've outlived all of your relatives, if you outlived all of your family, if you've got nowhere to go, if you need assistance, there will be a place for you. And almost from its inception, I would argue from its conception, not even from its inception, the Republicans have been against this idea. And this is a fundamental difference. This is one of those moments where when someone goes, the Democrats, Republicans, all the same. This is one of those fundamental issues that there is a massive difference between Republicans and Democrats. The fundamental Republican ideology is hooray for me and the hell with everybody else. And if you're one of the losers in this game, shame on you. There's the curb. If you're going to die, get on with it. We need to decrease the surplus population. Very, Charles Dickens-esque kind of society. And then there's people like me who grew up in poverty, watched people die, saw what happens when people live in poverty, and said, you know what? That's not the world I want for myself, and it's certainly not the world I want for my children. And it's rare that I'm speechless, but I sat for like 10 minutes just staring into outer space going, this can't be. This can't be who we are. This can't be what a good God-fearing Christian nation would do. This can't possibly be real. And then you read it again. And yeah, according to the spokesperson of the Department of Health, Bob Johannesson, the Louisiana Department of Health is beginning the process of notifying all impacted enrollees. That is such a nice way of taking the humanity completely out of this. We're notifying all of the impacted enrollees that some people may lose their Medicaid eligibility. I'm surprised. I'm sorry. I thought they put people in there. That some may lose their Medicaid eligibility. The goal of the department is to give notice to all affected people as soon as possible in order that they begin developing their appropriate plans. Imagine you're 80 years old, your body's broken down, your mind is, well, unfortunately gone. You have nowhere to go. What exactly appropriate plans do these people think that person's going to be able to make? I mean, I'm literally dumbfounded. And you go, well, it's just 37,000 people. You know, Medicaid, covers what, 70 million people across the country. In fact, 1 in 5 Americans gets something from Medicaid. It is the largest government insurance program. 70 million people. It's only 37,000. They had a good life. Let them move on to the afterlife. And that's not even talking about maybe it could be, a couple thousand employees are going to lose their jobs over this as well. And the reason I'm so enraged is you put this in one hand, the reality that as a country, we're going to do this. We're going to literally kick Granny to the curb. Sorry, take your walker, take your cat food, and, good luck there on the corner. Good luck on Skid Row. Maybe you can find a cardboard box down in the back. Then we find out that evidently, originally we were told this pharmaceutical company, this Novartis, paid, I guess it was it 400,000 is what they were saying yesterday? Today that number is $1.2 million. They were saying yesterday that it was $200,000 that AT&T was paying. Today it's $600,000. And you start going, explain to me, if we've got all this corporate money just flowing around that we can give to some nitwit who probably one of the worst attorneys you can find, we should be able to, at the barest of minimums, tax these people to make sure that no one is left in the street. I mean, and this was a day where, I had originally started off with, today was going to be about talking about the Wall Street Journal article, and maybe you saw it, that said that the median pay for the Fortune 500, or for the S&P 500 companies had risen to $12.1 million, the highest in the post-recession era. And you go through some of these people who you go, oh, why is it the guy who runs TripAdvisor is getting almost $48 million? How is it that Les Moonves over at CBS is getting almost $70 million? How is it a guy named Hock Tan that I've never heard of and Broadcom that I've never heard of is making $103.2 million when we're kicking people to the curb? When we're sentencing people to death? Because that's what you're doing with this. How is it possible that we just gave massive tax cuts to these people, massive tax cuts, that could have paid for this? I mean, the concert promoter, Live Nation, $70 million we're paying a guy to put on shows. Are you kidding me? All the while, we're literally going to be kicking Granny to the curb. And maybe it's just, maybe, I go back to, when I was a kid, and I remember the nursing homes that my mother worked in. because those were crummy jobs and they were a crummy place. They warehoused old people. I remember there were 4 in a room. And I remember, the stench of that place, and I remember how horrible it was. I don't want that for anybody. And the sad reality is every day I see us going backwards. Every day I see us losing part of what our grandparents' generation built, the safety net that was there for everyone. We as a society said, you know what? Nobody should go to bed hungry. Nobody should be homeless. No one in the twilight of their lives should be left out in the cold. And we're not just walking back from that. We're running. And you've got an administration right now that's hell-bent on taking care from children and seniors. And I guess there was part of me as I sat and I was just letting this roll through my head. Maybe it's just they don't vote. Kids can't vote. The shut-ins don't vote. So hell with them. Am I the only one that's angry about this? I mean, I got to be honest. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just me being a bit overreacting. Maybe I'm just, maybe I'm not getting the big picture here. Maybe it's just one of those things that I'm just not getting. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Head into our chat room. Share some thoughts there as well. Literally, I wanted to break something. That I was that angry, and I'm rarely ever that worked up about anything. But this just got me. Because, okay, it's just Louisiana. But understand, they're putting work requirements in states across the country. They're going to block grant some of this stuff. They're going to let governors use this as a slush fund to feed their political patrons. And what's going to happen? We're going to see this stuff like wildfire all across the country. Louisiana right now first, it's coming to a state near you. It's going to start with the poor states first. It's going to start with the states that already don't give a rat's behind about their seniors or the poor or the downtrodden. While claiming we're a God-fearing Christian nation, we're going to plaster the 10 Commandments. I'm almost at the point where maybe we need to plaster it right on people's foreheads. Maybe if we put the 10 Commandments on these 37,000 people, right on their foreheads, maybe they'd be treated differently. Or maybe not. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or send us a tweet to us at Rick Smith Show or in the chat room. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Kareem Brennan-Baker is going to be here to share some of his thoughts on gun violence, gun safety. Recently received an award from the NORA group, the anti-NRA group. Going to talk a little bit about that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day the West Coast Maritime Strike began. It was an historic strike that shut down the major ports along the Pacific coast. The strike also coincided with the pivotal Minneapolis Teamster strike and the Toledo Autolite strike. From Seattle to San Diego, longshoremen walked off the job. Harry Bridges led the Albion Hall Caucus in San Francisco. They demanded higher wages, shorter hours, and union representation. They also demanded a coast-wide agreement and a union hiring hall to replace the hated daily shape-up. Longshoremen were fed up with the gangster-run company union that controlled the arbitrary day labor hiring on the docks. From the pages of the Waterfront Worker newsletter, militant longshoremen took on the shippers, the government, craft unionism, and racism of the union. On the first day of the strike, dozens of black longshoremen joined the union and convinced others not to scab. Soon, all unions on the docks walked out in solidarity. By May 15th, the West Coast ports were completely shut down and 25,000 were out on strike by the end of the month. In his book, Workers on the Waterfront, Bruce Nelson notes the qualities that made the strike a success. He points to the militancy and discipline required to stand up to the National Guard during the deadly Maine battle on July 5th. The workers' solidarity across craft lines necessary for the San Francisco general strike that followed, a defiant rank-and-file independence, and the understanding that intensive red baiting could only serve the bosses. Though workers were forced back to work through arbitration, they were awarded their demands that fall. It would take more job actions to make those awards a reality. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
The rich pay too much taxes, the poor get way too much. Instead of schools, build prisons and lock the children up. We won't believe those lies again, because God is a Republican.
Yeah, God's a Republican, and he hates old people. Screw him, kick him to the curb. Anger, frustration. I mean, just shame on you, Louisiana. Shame on you and every one of you who support the idea of kicking 37,000 people out of nursing care. Just mind-blowing. But again, it's gonna sweep across this country. This is the Republican position. Let's move on. Our good friend Carrie Pennebaker is here. Evidently, Carrie got an award from the Nora Group, the 2018 Spirit of Action Award, and it couldn't go to a better guy. That's why I've asked our good friend Carrie Pennebaker to come talk with us. Carrie, thanks for taking time for us. Or not. This award that Carrie got was given by Alyssa Milano. And the group, this Nora group, is an anti-NRA group. It's one of those folks that are demanding legislative efforts to uphold the rights stated in their pledge, which is, we the people face a crisis, a mortal crisis, they say. Every year, tens of thousands of innocent people are killed or seriously wounded by guns. And yet, as much as we seek to enact gun safety and gun control legislation, we find ourselves stymied from doing so by the NRA and politicians it owns. Armed with extraordinary financial power and the political influence, the NRA militantly opposes any such efforts. And, you look at this, and the reality is we need to have some bit of gun sense, some bit of control. We've got Carrie back on the line. Carrie, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me on again, man. I appreciate it.
I heard you got an award. I guess Alyssa Milano gave you their Spirit of Action Award.
Yeah, it was an honor to receive the award. But as I said in my speech, the reason I'm in that room getting that award is because my mom is dead, for one, and two, because there are people that are dying every day, and I don't find it acceptable. So I'm using my voice, the platform that I've been given, to make as much of a difference and save as many lives as I possibly can. No, and look, and as I was thinking about this, and I'm sure any award or any accolade or any attention you get, you'd gladly give up to get your mother back for just a day. I'm in the same position. My mother passed away when I was 13, and I get it. But right. Using that voice, using that position that you're in, I think is so very important to push this issue forward. Absolutely. I mean, we cannot remain silent on this issue. We have 96 gun deaths a day, which become suicides like my mom. So we have to use our voice and so we can get the kind of legislation that we know will literally save people's lives.
So walk me through what NORA is. I understand this is one of the groups that Alyssa Milano helped to start. Is that right?
Yeah, so it stands for No Rifle Association. It was formed shortly after the Parkland shooting happened. And it's a group of civilians and activists alike that have decided that we're no longer willing to accept the fact that the NRA can control our politicians, so that we're going to make as much of a stand as we can so that our elected officials listen to America's voices and not the gun death lobby.
Now, is this a member organization? Can people join this? What is it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's open to everyone. We want folks who are willing to stand up and have their voice heard. And again, it's a group of regular folks along with celebrities you might see on TV or in the newspaper, but it's real people who know that the deadly carnage of gun violence is something that does not you're not insulated because of your economic status, your skin color, or your zip code.
But it helps. I mean, I got to be honest.
Oh,
there are very few shootings in the good the good zip codes. It's the zip codes where you have high poverty rates. It's the zip codes that have high rates of minority residents. That seems to be where a lot of our gun violence is, right?
No, actually, again, 2/3 of all gun deaths a year are gun suicides, and out of those 2/3, the overwhelming majority are white men. When you look at gun homicides, those typically happen to be people of color. So we need to address all segments of gun violence, not just the mass shootings that you see on TV or high-profile shootings. We need to make sure we address all segments and address the varying segments of gun violence that affect different communities, and not just look at the ones we see on TV when they happen.
Yeah, because we don't see the suicide ones on TV. We don't see any of that stuff. And, the statistics are scary because, people who have guns in the home, if some of the studies that I've read, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just having the gun in the home, increases the rates of suicide, increases the possibility of it, and obviously increases the use of the gun.
Absolutely. So when you have everyone in that house is astronomically put at risk for potential shooting. You're more likely to shoot yourself or someone you love rather than an assailant. And when a woman who has a gun in the house, when there's a domestic violence incident, the rates of her being shot skyrocket. So this is something we need to address head on, and not be afraid of talking about it, not being afraid of dealing with it, and not being afraid of those who stand in the way of common sense gun reform.
Yeah, there was a woman in, I think it was Reading, just a couple hours from here, Pennsylvania, who for about 15 minutes, she was the NRA darling because she had packed a gun in a holster, a 9mm in a holster, and gone to her 6-year-old's soccer game. And, all of the people were like, why are you carrying a gun to a kid's soccer game? And immediately the sheriff kind of took her gun away, and there was a whole big to-do, and she was, the big NRA hero for, like I said, about 15 minutes. And then about a year later, turns out she was chatting online with on the computer, and her boyfriend or whatever it was took the actual gun that she had slung over the chair and shot her in the back of the head and killed her while someone was watching on the screen, and then he ended up killing himself. And you go, crazy.
That's truly heartbreaking to learn of that, and it does not give me any sense of joy knowing that someone who may have been in opposition to our position at some point was then a victim of gun violence. There's nothing joyful or pleasurable about anything like that. It just goes to show that we do definitely need to have gun owners that are willing to be on our side, because by and large, we know the majority of gun owners support things like universal background checks, keeping guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have it, and namely, in that instance, domestic abusers. So this isn't an issue of we want to take your guns from you. This is simply about keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people and those that are mentally unwell, like my mom. And it really is heartbreaking to hear that when you already know 50-plus women are shot and killed every month by a current or former intimate partner. I really hope we can have a productive and civil conversation with those who own guns, so that they know the undue risk that they're placing on themselves and those in their household, so that they can take the kind of steps to keep themselves safe and their families safe.
Yeah, and the scary thing is we've got a Pennsylvania state representative still in the state house who threatened another state representative, a woman, threatened to kill her with a gun, and he is still, to this day, in the Pennsylvania State House of Representatives. He's not seeking re-election, but he and the Republican Party here will do nothing to throw him out.
That's shameful. That is truly shameful. So the best predictor of future violence is prior violence, and if someone is threatening someone, especially when a gun is involved, those who are in a position of authority or in law enforcement should take the appropriate action to make sure that the potential victim is kept safe. And we should not have to wait until the crime is committed to do something. And they know these things are going on, the kind of harassment that exists in our society, especially towards women and people of color and the LGBTQ community. We have to keep these communities safe, and it seems like those who have been purchased by the NRA and the gun death lobby are more beholden to that money than are to saving people's lives.
So how can we join this No RA group, or NORA? How can we join this?
So you can go. You can find No RA on Twitter. The account tweets quite a bit, to be honest with you. And then you can go to No RA USA. I'm pulling it up right now.
It's noranow.org is their website.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So folks can sign up, because the thing that the NRA has done masterfully, and you give them credit for organizing, is they have a militant membership. They've got 5 million very active, very militant, cold dead hands type people, and I would love to see 5 million equally active, equally militant people saying, no, we're not going to be crazy. We're going to bring the country to sanity.
And we're actually doing that. So when you look at the organization that Moms Demand has created, Moms Demand has over 4 million members. And the other thing about the NRA number, there's no way to verify that number, for one. And two, we already know that the majority of their membership agrees with our position.
Right.
Their leadership does not. So this isn't an argument against gun owners or gun ownership. This is about how the NRA and their leadership is preventing our country from moving forward to having common sense gun reform that 97% of Americans want. That includes gun owners and Republicans. So this is not something that is just a Democrat issue or just a career issue. Gun violence doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Republicans die from gun violence just like Democrats do. And it's high time that we remove the shackle, remove the boot that the NRA and the gun death lobby has on America's neck, and begin to move forward and usher in a kind of reform that's going to allow people to respect the Second Amendment, enjoy their gun ownership, but still be able to keep families and communities safe from gun violence.
So what does that look like? I mean, I love all of my NRA friends and go, they're legal gun owners and, responsible legal gun owners. I go, yeah, a lot of these mass shooters and a lot of these people who engage in shooting and killing people weren't legal gun owners until they weren't.
Yeah, I say the same thing. But if we have things, again, like common sense gun reform, specifically towards universal background checks, we know we can keep guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them. We know in the states that have universal background checks, we have 47% fewer gun suicides like my mom. We also know that here in Wisconsin, about 20% of all guns are sold are done so without a background check. And that is simply unacceptable. We know that if we can keep those guns from getting into hands of someone who's going to misuse it and use it in the commission of a crime, then we can literally save people's lives. And if you are a responsible gun owner, that is awesome. You should be on our side helping to make sure that you aren't put in a position where you're going to have to use your firearm in defense because someone else has got one. You would want to make sure that fewer and fewer bad guys have a gun. Like when you get people who will say, well, if we pass more gun laws,
only the criminals will have guns, Curry.
Right. All that means is they simply want to make it easy for bad guys to have guns. I don't find that acceptable. I will not resign myself to defeat and simply say, well, if someone's going to commit a crime, let's just give up. I don't accept that. I've met far too many gun violence survivors to accept defeat on this issue, and we definitely are going to win this.
So let me ask you about the assault weapons, because, you know, that's where all the news is. Everyone's talking about assault weapons bans, the AR-15s, the bump stocks, the high capacity magazines. And, you know, as it's explained to me by my NRA friends, handguns kill far more people than the AR-15s. You're going to come take my handgun. Where does it end? What's the response to that?
So let me start at the end of that. I don't want to come take a handgun from you. And even in talking about the prohibition of assault weapon sales, that doesn't mean we're going to come and confiscate the 15+ million assault weapons that are in current circulation. That's not feasible. America doesn't have the capacity, and it's illegal. So what we want to do is to make sure that assault weapons aren't going to be sold in future sales. We simply can't have weapons of war in the hands of civilians. When you look at what the damage that an assault weapon can do, it can cause far more carnage to the body than a regular handgun can. And we also need to make sure we put a capacity limit on magazines so that you can't just have a large drum or a large capacity magazine to simply mow down people in a classroom. We shouldn't have that, and that's a reasonable approach. But again, 9 out of 10 gun deaths happen with a handgun. So that's why I always start with universal background checks, because that's the most comprehensive way of reducing all segments of gun violence. And I think once we have these mass-scale conversations with people from both sides, I think there is a way to move forward. And again, we already know the majority of America, overwhelming. Can you think of anything in this country where 97% of the people agree on something? Background check is the only thing, right?
Yeah, you would think that would just go right through. And you would think the Republicans would want to put it to rest, and the NRA would want to put the issue to rest. Hey, we did something, even if they water it down to where it's almost non-effective. Just something. I mean, we're not even getting the show piece of legislation that goes, hey, look, we're trying. They're not even doing that.
Because they don't care. They honestly don't care. I mean, you'll hear people who will say, like, in private they support it, but in public they won't because they're afraid of the NRA. These people are afraid of a primary. That means they're afraid of the debate that's going to be ginned up by the NRA. But what that really means is that they're not afraid of a general election, which means that they're not afraid of people. They're not afraid of having to face all of us. When someone goes to office, you don't just represent the people that vote for you. You represent everyone in your district, right, or in your state or in the country. They have forgotten that, and it's time to remind them who they work for, and it is us, not the gun lobby.
Good stuff. Korea, congratulations on the award, and please keep up the great work you're doing. We'd love to have you come back and share some more and talk more about this, because this is an issue, sadly, that's not going away anytime soon.
Unfortunately, anytime you have me on, brother, I'll be on.
Thank you so much. Our good friend Kari Pennebaker. Again, as he pointed out, there 97% of us agree, and yet nothing. Love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1972. That was the day that employees at the Farah Manufacturing Company went out on strike. The company was one of the top producers of men's and boys' pants in the country, and the second largest employer in El Paso, Texas. The majority of workers were Chicano. More than 80% were women. These workers worked long hours for low wages and were required to meet a high quota demand. In the late 1960s, some of the male employees began to discuss their working conditions and what they could do to change things. One employee remembered the early days of organizing sometimes happened after softball games between the teams of workers from the different departments in the plant. We'd sit around after the game and talk about these things and the union. Men working in the cutting room voted to affiliate with the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. Workers from the San Antonio plant came to El Paso to support the union effort. These workers were fired. In response, 500 El Paso workers walked off the job. They demanded the right to have a union. Soon, more than 3,000 FARA employees went out on strike. The strike cause won the support of the Roman Catholic bishop in El Paso, who supported a boycott against FARA pants. The AFL-CIO called for a boycott. The campaign against FARA soon spread across the country. Even though the company brought in scab replacement labor, the effort to get a union continued. The fight wore on until March of 1974, when the National Labor Relations Board found in favor of the employees who had been fired. Unionization had come to FARA. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Rolling like a breeze, country roads, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home.
Yeah, West Virginia. Well, West Virginia turned away the coal baron, con man, convicted criminal Don Blankenship in GOP primary, not going to be the senatorial candidate. And I got to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised because maybe now the great state of West Virginia can begin to put some of the worst parts of its past behind it, start moving towards the future. If you remember, 2016, Hillary Rodham Clinton got just lambasted when she suggested maybe it was time to move on from the coal and start moving into the 21st century, or even the 20th century for that matter. But, recently, a California congressman, he evidently found his way down those country roads and found maybe a little bit different reaction. So maybe there can be life after coal, and also an opportunity for the Democratic Party to maybe revive its working class New Deal-like roots. That's why I've asked Congressman Ro Khanna to come talk with us and share some of his experience about being in the wild and wonderful state that used to be almost heaven. Ro, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
So exactly how do you get from Silicon Valley to West Virginia? Was Google Maps broken?
Well, it's a beautiful state for folks who haven't gone. But Gordon Gee, who was the president of Ohio State University and Columbia University, ended up retiring or choosing for his last job to take over West Virginia University. And he came and met me in my office, and he said he had this vision where he wanted to move West Virginia from Morgantown to Beckley. Morgantown's up north, and Beckley is down south. Expand the university, create engineering and tech opportunities for people in Beckley, and he wanted to partner with Silicon Valley. And he has successfully, I had introduced him to people at Google. Google has partnered with West Virginia Tech. And so I wanted to go down there to see for myself what it was like and how it was working.
And what did you find?
Well, I found a couple of things. One, young folks there know exactly what's going on. I mean, they come often from coal families. They're very proud of their history, their culture. Some of them have friends who are still in coal, but they get that the economy is changing, and they want diverse opportunities. Just like in my district, not everyone wants to go work in tech. In their district, not everyone wants to just go work in coal. They want to have opportunities. The biggest thing that they are concerned about is that they don't want to leave off in West Virginia. They don't feel it's fair that they don't have jobs in West Virginia. They don't want to leave their families, their cousins, their community that they grew up. And so I was very, very impressed with their initiative, with their sense of understanding of the new economy, and hopeful, actually, of the possibility for some of these jobs. My view is it'll take two things. One, it'll take genuine respect for the community, the culture, the sensitivities. And two, it's going to take real investment. I mean, we can't just say, okay, here's the 21st century economy, now you figure it out. It's got to be, here are some real opportunities for jobs. Here are some real opportunities for getting the types of education and skills to succeed in those jobs.
And also add to that, not just the education part, but also the infrastructure. I mean, you go into southern parts of West Virginia, you're still driving on dirt roads.
Yeah, I mean the highway there was pretty great, but I mean you need certainly access to high-speed internet and broadband. You need better public transport. You need public transport to the major metropolitan areas. But the biggest thing is jobs, right? I mean, we can't just say to them, okay, do something else, and then they say, okay, what do you want us to do? And then not have an answer. I mean, what are the tech companies doing to make stuff there or to have a center there, or some office there? What are we doing to provide perhaps subsidies for the first job so that they get the opportunity to get into the labor market or be able to work remotely? What are we doing to make sure they have the opportunity to get education at a cost that's not going to put them in debt? So I think what I've said is the President Obama, who I have deep admiration for, I worked in his administration, managed through eloquence to overcome the divide between red states and blue states. He said, we have one nation. But the reality is it's more than eloquence and ideals that will be needed. The fact of the matter is there are places in this country that simply don't have the economic opportunities that people in my district have. We have a concentration of economic opportunity, and that's going to require our party to wake up to that inequality and really have tangible, concrete solutions about how we're going to address it.
Yeah, let me ask you this, because, the right wing would argue, well, the free market has decided that Silicon Valley is going to be where all the computer people are. And, you just go around the country and find those. And they've decided that rural America is not, because, look, West Virginia is not unique. You can go through parts of Virginia, you go through parts of Pennsylvania, you go through parts of, most of Appalachia, and you find the kind of abject poverty that West Virginia and, Mississippi and Alabama, and you go through these places and you find it. Are you talking about massive government intervention and pushing and hoping, maybe putting out a pot of money for these corporations to get to more tax breaks? What are we talking about?
Well, first I would argue that good ideas are everywhere, and you have people like Brad Smith, who's the president of Microsoft, who grew up in West Virginia, or John Chambers, who headed up Cisco. So I believe, especially having been there, seeing the work ethic and creativity and of these young folks, that it would be a tragedy of the United States were to say we're going to write off a third of our country or half our country. And by the way, we don't have that luxury when we're competing with 1.2 billion people in China. So if we were going to say, okay, all we care about is Silicon Valley or a few areas of the country, and we're not going to develop the talent in all parts of our country, I think that would be a terrible economic policy. So then the question is, well, how do you do it? And my view is several things. One, you got to have institutes of technology across America, like West Virginia Tech, where you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree. Some of it could be teaching people in the regional industry. So in Cleveland, you could have auto repair and the new types of technology that are going to be needed. In West Virginia Tech, they actually had a 1-year course on outdoor management, because so much of the industry is related to outdoor activity and some of the technology skills that will be needed to do that. You can train people on, we know the technology spend right now, $1.2 trillion, 10% of it is on hardware and software. 70% is on hardware and software, only 10% is in the cloud. And we know, for anyone looking at it, that 70% is going to go to the cloud in the next 10 years. What does that mean practically? It means if people understand Google computing or how to be on the Amazon web design platform or Microsoft Azure, they don't need a college degree. They need maybe a 6-month, 9-month course. They will be able to get a job and work remotely. How do we create those opportunities in places that don't have them? How do we create advanced manufacturing apprenticeship? And how do we, for places where people really haven't had a job for 90 days, I believe we ought to subsidize them to get a job.
Okay.
But anyway, those are some ideas.
No, I mean, they're all great. But my point was, I live in a fairly rural area, and I argue that had it not been for government intervention, we still wouldn't have indoor electricity or indoor plumbing because we, as a government, said, we're going to push this. The Electrification Act, back in the 40s, made sure that we did this. So what I'm asking is, how do we get this? How do we do this? Because I'm 100% in agreement. We can't write off those rural areas because I live in a fairly rural area, and know people across this country who live in rural areas. How do we get into that? Is that a federal program, or are we again hoping that the free market, that the corporations are going to save us?
I think it's got to be a federal program. It's got to be a federal program to have high-speed internet and broadband everywhere in this country, like we did electrification. It's got to be a federal program to have the right technology institutes across America, like we had the land-grant colleges, which were at the time for agriculture. It's got to be a federal program in terms of the credentialing and certification for jobs. In Germany, for example, if you're a cook, if you are in the service business, you actually can make a better than minimum wage and have a middle class life because you have to get certification and apprenticeships, and they have a higher minimum wage and a higher dignity for decent work, and that I think requires the federal government's involvement. So I believe the federal government has a huge role to play, and even free market economists like Larry Summers have acknowledged that without the federal government in areas which have been left behind, you're not going to see economic success. And then I guess the question for all of us as Americans is, do we care, right? I mean, if you believe in just free markets and let the markets do whatever, that may mean that all the jobs could go to China or overseas and not have labor standards or go across the border. And I guess if that's what we believe in, if we don't have a concept of America, then you can let the free markets run wild and the corporations will do very well, and they've made record profits in the last 70 years. But if you believe that the country matters, that we have some obligation to our fellow citizens, that we want to see everyone in America have a shot, then you have to believe in the government. And I think this election in 2016 was pretty clear. People still cared about America. They didn't just want, they weren't indifferent to corporate profits or jobs going everywhere around the world.
No, you're absolutely right. And the hope is that maybe this is an opportunity to maybe claw back some of those red states like West Virginia, who used to be blue states, by creating another path forward. And this is the other part of this. I've been asking, what's the Democratic vision of the future? I mean, you go back to FDR's New Deal, it was about making people's lives better. How do Democrats sell this kind of a message? And is there an appetite in the Democratic Party for what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Two things about FDR. When you go back and you look at his right to have a job, he talks about not just a right to a public job. Do we remember the WPA job? But he talks to a right to a job on a farm, in shops, in new industries, in mining back then. He's talking about the right to have a public job. Do we remember the WPA job? But he talks to a right to a job on a farm, in shops, in new industries, in mining back then. He's talking about the right to have a private sector job. And I think the Democratic vision has got to be, yes, we're for federal jobs, but we're also actually, the government has a responsibility to help you get a job that's going to give you a economic security and a shot at the middle class, and that we're going to make that kind of investment. And I think that would be well received. And I'm an Indian American guy of Hindu faith. I went down to West Virginia. My district is 60% foreign born, 50% Asian American, and I had a great time, and people were very respectful, and they were very, very excited. So I think the differences in this country can be overcome if there's real economic opportunity and if there's respect. Because one of the things that, one of the young kids said to me, my brother is still in the coal mines, and I said, what would he say to me? And he said, look, he would say, we go 6 feet underground and get dirt in our face so your state, California, can get its electricity. And I said, okay, and I respect that. And he said, but I'll tell you what, he's really proud of what I'm doing here. He's proud of the fact that I'm going to have a new job and a different type of opportunity. So there's got to be a balance where we can respect the culture, the contributions, that West Virginia has made to the country. I mean, California used to be the biggest oil-producing state. We wouldn't have a lot of Silicon Valley if it wasn't for the oil fortunes. Gordon Getty's oil fortune has probably helped to make the careers of many Democratic politicians. So I don't think we should come at this with a holier-than-thou attitude. It's got to be one of respect and then of diversification of opportunity.
Yeah, and at the end of it, making people's lives better, because when that's happening, good things happen. Last line of questioning, I want to move to a different topic, because I think this is great, and I'd love to have you back to talk about this as it continues. But yesterday, the president pulled out of the Iran deal. I wanted to get some of your thoughts on what I just think is probably the worst way he could have pulled out of this, by basically calling the Iranians liars. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, it's as if we never learn and are doomed to repeat history. And you know the history where in 1953, our government overthrew Mossadegh, who had the Democratic support because Mossadegh wanted to nationalize Iranian oil and take it away from the British. And then for 25 years, we supported the Shah in Iran, who was totally unpopular and people felt wasn't looking out for Iran. And then we supported Saddam Hussein. I mean, there are famous pictures of Donald Rumsfeld going and arming Saddam to fight the Iranians. So mistake after mistake. Finally, you get sanity there with Obama, who understands the history, and he says we've got to reset the relationship, and it's the best prospect of Iran not going nuclear. We reset the relationship. And what is so sad is without even addressing the history, without understanding any of the nuance, Donald Trump has reset us back to 1953, and it is going to. This is about another war in the Middle East. I mean, it is just absolutely disturbing and totally inconsistent with George Washington and John Quincy Adams and all our founders and thinkers who warned us against interventionism. What we ought to be doing is helping the kids in West Virginia for their economic future and their lives, not wasting our resources, time, and money and getting bogged down in yet another Middle East war.
Well, you're so spot on. And the other part of this is, what other country in the world now is going to respect our word going forward? I mean, as long as we have one president, maybe they can make an agreement with them. But who's to say that the next administration isn't going to come and do this again? There's nothing good in this for me.
You're absolutely right. And the issue is very simple. We, as a country, always used to have a functioning democracy, a respect for institutions, where our word used to matter. And this is where Donald Trump is not a conservative. I mean, a conservative, like Edmund Burke, would respect traditions and institutions and the functioning of our democracy. Donald Trump's throwing all of that out, and it's just very, very sad. But, I've got to get going to vote, so let me end with this. Here's what gives me hope. None of the stuff in D.C., not the president, not Congress, but when I went to see those kids in West Virginia and I saw their determination, their aspirations, their sense, these young people across this country, I think they get that the world is changing. They get that the politicians have also let them down. And I think they're really the future of this country that are going to do great things. Good stuff. Ro Khanna, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much. Good stuff. And look, at the end of this, he's absolutely right. These kids, hopefully, the future of this country, move us in the right direction. And I love the idea. I love the plan. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. Day in labor history, the year was 1970. On that day, workers and the U.S. labor movement lost a leading voice in a tragic plane crash. There is no greater calling than to serve your fellow men. There is no greater contribution than to help the weak. There is no greater satisfaction than to do it well.
These inspiring words were the credo of Walter P. Reuther, the longtime leader of the United Automobile Workers. Reuther became president of the UAW in 1946 and held that position for a quarter of a century. Under his leadership, auto workers saw some of the greatest gains. The UAW was able to win improvements in job security, health care, and wages. Reuther's effective leadership caused the governor of Michigan to dub him the most dangerous man in Detroit. Reuther learned about the labor movement from his father, a member of the Brewers Union in Wheeling, West Virginia. As a young man, Reuther moved to Detroit to work in the booming auto industry, landing a job at Ford. He became involved in union organizing, gaining national prominence as he led a strike against General Motors in 1945. The next year, he was elected president of the UAW. Reuther believed that unions were part of a broader social movement and had the power to improve the lives of all working Americans. He was a strong supporter of the civil rights movement, delivering a speech at the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. As UAW president, he placed an emphasis on worker education. In 1960, the UAW built an education center in northern Michigan. Walter and his wife May were flying there when their plane crashed, killing them both. President Nixon called Reuther's death a deep loss not only for organized labor, but also for the cause of collective bargaining and the entire American process. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
You know, listening to Ro Khanna there, I got to be honest. You know, again, it's that divide between Republicans and Democrats, right there. Again, he's saying, look, we need to go into these areas and we need to encourage industry. We need to help build these industries up, and if the private sector won't do it, the public sector is going to have to. And I've been saying that for a very long time. Look, if the private sector can't or won't create enough jobs, government has to step in and do it. And, you know, I would prefer, you know, how we used to do it in the old days, the old public-private partnerships of the past, which were we used public money and said, hey, we want something. We want roads. We want bridges. We want broadband access. We want electricity in homes. We want plumbing in homes. We want stuff. We want dams. We want, you name it. We took public money. We hired private companies, and they did it. Hired private workers and did all that stuff. And the quote-unquote free market, you know, they fought over quality. They fought over speed. Wages, not so much. I mean, you think about our grandparents' generation, a heavily unionized era where I think about the trucking industry where I came out of. The National Master Freight Agreement was really an amazing feat because it said truck drivers across this country, you're going to earn a decent living. And trucking companies will compete not on how low prices can get, not on how one company is willing to slit the throat of the other company, but how well you run your runs, how safe you operate, how well you handle the people's merchandise, how well you have customer service, you know, on positive things instead of the race to the bottom stuff, which unfortunately is how low can wages go? How desperate of a workforce can we exploit? And I'll tell you, you know, at some point, we have to have these conversations. And it's just not West Virginia. We did a labor history tour, and we drove all across this country. There are a lot of poor areas, a lot of areas that have just been left and neglected and left behind. And again, it comes back to our horrible trade deals, and it comes back to how much power we have given corporate America and how much power we've given them to monopolize. How these big companies have just gotten insanely bigger. There isn't any competition anymore. The idea of the invisible hand and companies fighting, it doesn't exist. They collude now. And they collude against us. Cheap products that break all the time, planned obsolescence, and crappy wages for working people. No health care, no pensions. They've won the game. Which is why in the next hour we're going to talk about Bernie Sanders' plan to revive the labor movement, which, again, he's got a nice plan. Not original. Just throwing that out there. Basically undoing Taft-Hartley, not original, something I've advocated for my entire working life, and a lot of people have, but I give Bernie credit. He's actually out there saying this is how we have to do it. This is how we move the country forward. I'm all on board. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And if you're listening on a station that just picks up the first hour, head on over to thericksmithshow.com for hour 2. For everyone else, stick around. Right back with Scott Dworkin.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
It's not enough. What do you get?
Oh, yes, a little bit more. It's all they need. A little more. The giant kleptocracy that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. And I got to tell you, this Michael Cohen thing, not surprising whatsoever. And what's surprising to me is Stormy Daniels' attorney is the one that's putting this out there for us to find. If you don't think Mueller knows this, I got bridges, lots of bridges. But like I said yesterday, it was AT&T just 200,000. We now find out 600,000. The giant pharmaceutical company was just 400,000. Now it's 1.2 million. What's it going to be tomorrow? How often does this change? And again, comes back to following the money. And here to share some thoughts on the recent news of the day, I've asked our good friend Scott Dworkin to come talk with us. He's the co-founder of the Democratic Coalition, also host of the Dworkin Report. Scott, thanks for taking time for us. And Scott's not there. So it's one of those things that evidently he's not hearing us. It's one of those things that once again, you look at the amount of money that's going toward the Trump people, all of the Trumpites, all of the Trump folks who are cashing in on this, that, I once again look at and go, explain to me how it is that they're cashing in on all of this. Now, there are some who would say, well, this is how Washington works, Rick. A new administration comes in and, corporations want to curry favor. So they hire the favorite lawyer. They hire, these folks to pick up the pieces, if you will. This is how Washington works. This is, don't be naive. This is how it works. AT&T had some business they wanted to get through. They had a merger they were looking into. So they hired someone close to the president to kind of grease the wheels. It's how it works, Rick. Don't you know? This is the reality of the world in which we live in. And I got to be honest. I'll tell you the truth. This isn't the world that I want us to be living in. This is the Trump world. This is how things have already devolved, in my opinion. And the question is when do we say enough is enough already? When does this come? When do we finally say, this is the kind of stuff, regardless of the administration, that has to stop. This kind of scheming, this kind of scamming, this kind of ripoff has got to stop. And here to talk a little bit about the big payoffs, the money that is filling the pockets of Michael Cohen and who knows who else. I've got our good friend Scott Dworkin on the line. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
My man, how are you, Rick?
I am good. What do you think of all this money that we now find out is flowing into the coffers of Michael Cohen, and who knows who else is being paid off? But what are you thinking about this?
We've known, different people from the Trump orbit have been receiving payoffs from different corporations, and also from Russians specifically for the better part of a year and a half now. And it's millions of dollars. I think what we're seeing now is corruption being exposed at the level it deserves, because right now, you're seeing the implosion. First of all, the one thing that I want to make clear to everybody is there's absolutely no way that Trump didn't know. There's no way that Trump wasn't involved, and there's absolutely, that's just not even possible. In regards to Novartis, who paid Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, $1.2 million for consulting, which is total BS. I would say, one of the first meetings that Trump ever took was with the CEO of Novartis. So I'm not surprised that then, Trump probably said, hey, you touch base with my guy. And then he's making money. I bet Trump's making money off of his office. I mean, it was just confirmed yesterday that one of the largest housing complexes in the country is selling for hundreds of millions of dollars, and he makes $36 million off that sale. And it's just he's the president of the United States. He's making decisions based on his business interests and not the best interests of the American people.
Yeah, so it sounds like to me that he's Don Trump. He's the mob boss who's getting the kickback. He's getting the vig. This is what this sounds like. It sounds like a bad 80s mafia movie.
Yeah, in 2016, I called him it was a big ordeal. I called him. I said he's the biggest mobster in the world, and everybody got, oh my God, that's so offensive. I guess I'm finally able to say I was right, because it's always been this way. The Trump family has been one of the most politically involved families in American history. And they've hidden it well, but they're up there with the Bushes, and that level, probably more so. And in New York City, the most prominent family of all in politics. And so this is not something that's new to them. And they've been exploiting everything that they can for their own gain. There was one thing that we dug up where Trump had sued the city of New York. This is a brilliant little scheme he's got. Sued the city of New York for $500 million, saying that he had lost money on appraisals, something like that, because there was a scam. And he was actually in on that scam that he sued the city for. Not only that, they gave him, his buddies in the offices, gave him a tax break of 100% for the first 2 years, and then it went down. So a 10-year tax abatement, just as a kind of, let's settle this out of court. And the astronomical amount of money that involves is ridiculous. So
you stop and you think about the amount of welfare that we've given Donald Trump. And again, this is another one of those reasons I wanted to see the tax returns. I think we all wanted to see the tax returns to find out, one, how wealthy he is, and two, where the starting point was, because we knew this administration was going to be full of kleptocrats. We knew these were the new era bank robbers. We knew it. And at the end, I wanted to be able to go, see, this is how much they stole.
Guess who has his tax returns?
I'm hoping Mueller's got them.
Bet your bottom dollar. So he started, the first thing that he did when he got started, he's partnered with the IRS. So what I say every time is, not only does he have those records, he has the tax returns for every country that Donald files one in, because there's money spread out through different countries where he holds them in funds, as in the money never actually comes back here. So he makes money, let's say in India, for example. We found video of him saying, he has a fund in India, and the idea behind that is the money that he gets, he puts in that pot there. And he has different pots like that in dozens of countries throughout the world.
Right.
It's very hard to track his wealth. He's much wealthier, and I hate saying this, but he's much wealthier than anybody could ever imagine. It's just spread out throughout the world. So I think the great thing about this is Mueller's going to have tax returns from every single country he files in.
So let me ask you this then, because there obviously the first part of this investigation was the obstruction and finding out what the campaign did with Russia. Ultimately, I mean, because I'm thinking about the Clinton investigation that started off with staying on actually started off with a bad land deal that Clinton lost money on and ended up with a stain on a dress. Is it possible that this goes from obstruction and obviously the collusion with the Russians to all of his horrible criminal financial dealings? Is that possible?
Yeah, because I think that a lot of these people are behind those dealings. A lot of these people that are coming out now have been business partners with him for years. A lot of these people who are connected between Russia and here, as you'll see, this is a Russian-American sort of mafia syndicate. This is not something that has been built overnight. This is long-term, decades in the making, and it's an international crime. That's the best way to talk about it, is the Trump crime family is an international crime syndicate, and they're now involved in politics, and we are feeling that. If you think about it like this, Trump walks around and he's like, I'll slap my name in a property and I'll take a vig. Like, that's basically what it is. He takes a cut because he slapped his name on it, and he threatens to take his name off if he doesn't like the way you're doing business or you don't give him enough money. He puts the squeeze on you. I mean, it's really built for a mafia movie, but the espionage aspect of it, I think, is going to become very real when different parts of evidence is going to be key here. There's going to be videos, there's going to be tapes, there's going to be people who, because those conversations between Cohen that were taped, I assume that they're going to make the light of public. So I would assume that they are screwed.
I'm just based on what they got out of Cohen's office. And
one sentence, Don Jr. saying, I'll relieve sanctions if you give me some dirt. Like something, like it really takes something like that where it's done. It's over, right? And everybody's like, oh, well, I don't think no, this is different because we're facing criminal charges now for the president. And I think that's, like, it's kind of ridiculous. If the Republicans want to act like this is not a big deal, I'm cool with that, because we'll take that to the finish line in November. There's nothing, they can really do to make up for everything that they've damaged so far.
So let me ask you this, Scott, because, I see Rudy Giuliani running around now, basically just muddying the waters. I mean, if he's trying to make things better, he's not. In my view, if he's trying to muddy the waters and get the base to believe that there are no facts, nothing's true, don't believe anything. You can't believe any institution, can't believe the FBI, can't believe the CIA, can't believe, the Justice Department. You can't believe anybody. He's done his job in that. But at the end of the day, it's still going to come down to the rule of law and fact, the difference between the court of public opinion and a court of law.
Yeah, I think that reality sets in all these games, the propaganda, the back and forth, the lies, all that comes to a halt when people see truth, and people are hungry for it. So the second they see evidence that's undoubted, something like paperwork between Cohen and the Russians, video of them meeting, tape of them, like audio of them talking together. I mean, once these things come out, just like Cambridge Analytica, it's going to fall apart. There is only one destiny for this, is disaster. There is no other way out. There's too many scandals. There's too many, and it's not even like the scandals are made up and we have to investigate it. It's the fact that it exists. It's whether or not who's going to press charges against who. So, and which is going to get him first. It's really interesting, because there's dozens of scandals, and they're all different agencies investigating him. I mean, not just federal agencies, but at the state level. And so something's going to break very soon, and it's going to be big enough, I think, to end his presidency.
And when do we think that is?
Tomorrow.
You think it's going to be tomorrow?
I want to be optimistic. No.
I know. I'd love to. Look, I think every day I would love it to be every.
Tomorrow, 100%. No, don't put. I don't know, because it really can be as simple as another sort of. But again, any kind of solid evidence that comes out is going to be good enough to I think end it all. And it's right now everything's on the cusp. Like Russian collusion, we sort of have that, but we don't have the evidence. I can tell you he did it. From what I've seen, he did it. His family did it. Ivanka's involved. Eric's involved. Eric's smarter than he comes off of. Don Jr. absolutely. At least 130 different people who are in Trump's orbit absolutely colluded with Russia. What they would be charged with is conspiracy against the United States, or lying to federal investigators, or parts of the cover-up, obstructing or interfering in the investigation. I mean, there's going to be people in the news charged. There's going to be people who are Republican members of Congress that are charged, staffers that are charged, White House staff that are charged, possibly Pence, unlikely though, and Nunes obviously, Rohrabacher obviously. This is not. That's why it's so weird to see people break the law in real time and do it so overtly, because they think that they can get away with it. They're above the law, and when it comes down to it, they're going to find out with the hammer that Mueller has, basically in the crumbling White House. Mueller's going to rip those pillars off, and he's going to start beating Trump with it, because right now it's go time, and I think everyone in the country has had it.
You got a question for Scott? We'd love to hear it. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Shoot your question to us, or you can hit us over at Twitter at Rick Smith Show. Let me ask you this, because there are a lot of Republicans who aren't running for re-election. Mm-hmm. Maybe is that the beginning list of all the people who may be doing perp walks at some point in the future? They're going, got to get out of here.
I think some people were concerned that they didn't want to be in the mix with it, like Jason Chaffetz is one, Gowdy is another, Speaker Ryan. I think they don't want to be mixed up with it, and they want to also have a chance to go out on a high note, not Nunes or Rohrabacher. But yeah, there are absolutely going to be members of Congress that do that. The ones that are going out, I think that they're just being lazy because it's going to be a fight, and they don't want to have to fight for this. And I understand that, people have been elected for years, and they're like, okay, like this is the perfect time to just bow out. And that, coupled with, leadership collapsing and Trump's failed presidency, it all makes it a lot easier for Dems to take back the House. Now it's kind of like, how far is that Dem wave gonna go? And that's what we just started targeting our races. We're going to end up targeting 7 Senate races and at least 65 different House races from the coalition itself.
Well, let me ask you this, because, you're seeing a lot of the Democratic leadership, shying away from talking about impeachment, and they're tapping all of that down. Right. Does that hurt Democrats in November if they're running on a look? We've got to hold this guy accountable. Where do you see that going?
I think we're going to focus more on the investigatory angle and balance of power. The impeachment angle is hard because we can't get even one Republican to bend on it. So it's not worth the argument because the end game isn't there. It's not there right now. We did get people to talk about it, which is great. So we're pushing on a couple different angles. One is we think he should resign. And so a resignation push is going to be big. At least to get people to talk about the potential of resigning. Why doesn't he resign? There's so many scandals. Even if you were innocent on every count, innocent on everything, even if you were, let's give him the benefit of the doubt in La La Land. Even if you were, this is too busy for any president to survive or Americans to have to put up with.
Yeah, there's just so much going on. So I'm curious. I want to ask you about the Iran deal, because I think Trump pulled us out of that in probably the worst way possible. Looking at the Iranians saying you're liars and cheaters and all of that stuff. I'm looking at this and going, okay, he made a campaign promise. How did this get into his head? Is it just how bad that he hates Obama and this is about that, or is this something more? I'm curious your thoughts.
So Iran apparently fired 20 missiles within the last hour or 2 hours or so into part of Israel, or whatever you want to call it. It's a middle area near Syria. And then Israel fired back into Iranian occupied areas in Syria and made it an overt threat, and also claimed, responsibility for the attack. I think people died in the Israeli response. I don't think anybody died in the 20 missiles that were fired over. But I think the point, what I'm making here is I think he started a war. I think he started a world war, and I think I don't know where it goes from here, but these people are furious with each other, and if the reports are correct, and there are deaths, I think it only escalates from here, because again, this is not how the world is supposed to work, and you're not supposed to. You think that you're going to make an agreement with North Korea and they're going to believe you? I mean, why would they? You try to do it with Iran and you're going to back out. And not only that, Iran said we're going to try and stay in it anyways. And so I think we're facing it's disaster for the United States, because we're being closed out from intelligence, we're being closed out from the rest of the world, and we're being isolated. And so Putin's winning, and that's, I guess, the point here. But the Iran deal, I think it was the dumbest decision he's made to date. It's worse than anything he's ever done this week, I guess. This week, yeah. But what do you say to the person who's going to go, well, you know what, Scott? Iran started it. Scott. That's great to know. But they're not. Their power base comes from Russia. So this is all stemming from that. I mean, we have to remind ourselves of that. This is not wholly Iran, their fault, because they're supported and propped up by countries like Russia. And that isn't helpful to the cause. It just hurts everything. And I think right now, the conflict is so heated and the rhetoric is so heated, people are going straight at there's no other option for some people. People are desperate. They're dying already. They're going to die of starvation. So it's like, let's just start a war. And I think, again, with all the scandals Trump has, it's pretty clear to me that he had the intention of starting a war. And I don't see any other, because there was the lack of support for his withdrawal of it everywhere. The only thing that would make sense is to cause chaos. And he did that. And I think now the top headline is going to be war instead of his scandals. And so whether or not that's intentional, we'll never know. But I would bet on it. It seems like Wag the Dog. If you watch bad movies, that's what it seems like. Yeah, it's sad to say, because it actually, saying it out loud for the first time, when reality, I thought this would happen at some point. You don't hope that it happens under any president. I don't want that to happen. I don't want us to be in that predicament, because we're already at war. We're in multiple fronts. And so, to extend that, it's just, this is a problem, and it's not going to be solved via Twitter. I hope to God he does not go on some kind of tirade that causes more bloodshed throughout the world. But I have a feeling that he will be a directly to blame for some kind of military action because of his tweet. Somebody gets pissed off and they kill people. That's what people do. So hopefully he doesn't do anything stupid in the next 24 hours. Because right now it's the worst I've ever seen it since after 9/11. And now you're looking at this moment where we are split from our allies over this issue, because they wanted us to stay in the deal. Look, and this is one of those things that I just don't understand. If you thought it was bad, go back, try and renegotiate it. You don't just smash it with a hammer, and you don't do it in the way that he did, in my view. I'm sorry, look, if you don't like the deal, you work around it. But at the end of the day, what is this going to say about us as a country if our word doesn't matter? Well, it's going to say that it's run by a fraud. I think it's who he is. this is who he is. He likes chaos. He thrives off of it, and feels empowered by it. He likes pushing the envelope on everything. He's willing to negotiate using humanity, human life, as collateral. He doesn't think of humans as humans. He thinks of them as, collateral damage. It's part of what happens. He's okay with torturing people. He's not on board with the Geneva Convention, obviously. How far is he willing to go? When's he going to start killing his own people? And is it going to be people like you and me? Because
first one's in line.
That's what I'm talking about. But in reality, I really do think that it's very dangerous right now. And so
I go back to the Pastor Niemöller quote. First they came for the communists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I said nothing. And then they came for the trade unionists, and on down the list. And by the time they got to me, there was nobody left to speak up. And I fear that we're reliving history.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. We have some bright spots. There are some Republicans starting to turn. Sadly, McCain, in a positive way, he just came out and said that he would be voting against Gina Haspel, which would be expected, but his words were powerful in that regard. And so I think you're going to see hopefully we see the sanity return to Washington. But I can tell you you can tell I'm uneasy, but I'm getting, dozens of text messages every minute or so on different things that are happening, and the world is in chaos, and it's not going to get better anytime soon, especially not with this guy in charge. And this, I myself am gonna calm down the rhetoric. I think we got to be really serious at this point. We got to get really serious about what's happening.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let me ask you last line of question, because you brought up Gina Haspel. Now that McCain is not supporting her, Manchin said he is, so that cancels out Rand Paul. Does she have the votes? Is she going to be confirmed?
I think so. And what's scary is I'm not sure. I think we can do much worse than her. Like, even though she's terrible, I think she's awful and she should be disqualified. And I think that's the word that McCain used. She should be her stance on torture should disqualify her. I don't think that Tom Cotton, that would be a disaster. We don't want anybody that's a Trump crony 100%. So I take her over the long list of losers below her. But it's kind of like picking through a bag of garbage, like which banana peel, which was rotten, are we going to eat? Like that's what we're looking at, the scraps. Not the best qualified, not the best for diplomacy, and the look of the agency and how we are. Because if you endorse this, you're endorsing torture, and again, that's just more propaganda for terrorist groups to use against us. Look at this look at this person. She loves waterboarding, and she's in charge of America now. The CIA, blah blah blah. I can see it now, and it's tiring. But I'll say it again. Like we need to get serious about people like this, and make sure that we're clear as to how we stand, and make sure to remind the American people of that in November. Hopefully, everybody votes Democrat and. Or independent in the case that it is, and votes against these immoral whack jobs that keep on lighting the country on fire and slowly destroying us.
Yeah, all these people who are the scorched earth folks, we should send them packing. Scott, I appreciate the thoughts, the time. Keep up the work that you do, and I look forward to having you back in real soon.
Talk to you soon.
I would say good stuff, but not so much. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You and me, but we're not unarmed. Our weapons, solidarity. Jim Beals and Karen Silkwood. The list goes on and on. With every year that passes, 60,000 more gone. Oh, it's a war on
proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day the West Coast Maritime Strike began. It was an historic strike that shut down the major ports along the Pacific coast. The strike also coincided with the pivotal Minneapolis Teamster strike and the Toledo Autolite strike. From Seattle to San Diego, longshoremen walked off the job. Harry Bridges led the Albion Hall Caucus in San Francisco. They demanded higher wages, shorter hours, and union representation. They also demanded a coast-wide agreement and a union hiring hall to replace the hated daily shape-up. Longshoremen were fed up with the gangster-run company union that controlled the arbitrary day labor hiring on the docks. From the pages of the Waterfront Worker newsletter, militant longshoremen took on the shippers, the government, craft unionism, and racism of the union. On the first day of the strike, dozens of black longshoremen joined the union and convinced others not to scab. Soon, all unions on the docks walked out in solidarity. By May 15th, the West Coast ports were completely shut down, and 25,000 were out on strike by the end of the month. In his book, Workers on the Waterfront, Bruce Nelson notes the qualities that made the strike a success. He points to the militancy and discipline required to stand up to the National Guard during the deadly Maine battle on July 5th. The workers' solidarity across craft lines necessary for the San Francisco general strike that followed, a defiant rank-and-file independence, and the understanding that intensive red baiting could only serve the bosses. Though workers were forced back to work through arbitration, they were awarded their demands that fall. It would take more job actions to make those awards a reality. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Lots going on today. Lots in D.C., lots of stories, lots of intrigue, payments that, well, hush money, bribes, a little under the table here and there, good con man kind of things going on. And look, all stuff we know. No, there should be no surprise whatsoever to what we're seeing. Anyway, let's get some news from Washington, D.C. I've got Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here. The past 10 years have somehow been put into the past couple of days. It really does kind of feel like you're drinking from the water hose. And, this morning I woke up and realized that the Iran deal was announced yesterday and not, what it felt like, years and years and years ago. And I just kind of realized that, D.C. is in sort of some kind of weird quantum flux and nothing makes sense when it comes to time anymore.
No, I mean, it's amazing to me. And I've talked to a lot of my right-wing friends who they've bought whatever Kool-Aid it is that Trump is selling. And outside of that, the deal made us unsafe. There wasn't really, and it was a bad deal, of course. It was bad. It was terrible. It was horrible. They can't give me anything else.
Yeah, and that was something that was pretty interesting yesterday. We saw the administration really just grasping at straws when it came to trying to explain why they were doing this. Trump asserted that this made the U.S. more safe, but didn't really explain why. John Bolton was asked, why the U.S. was walking away from the table when there was no evidence that Iran was in violation of the agreement. He pointed to some concerns that they were overproducing heavy water, which is a far cry from some of the, more scary measures that were initially prevented from this deal being put forward. So, as it stands right now, the administration is claiming that if Iran suddenly decided to make a nuclear weapon under this, they would be able to, do so almost immediately, which is a far cry from them being able to, at least within the eyes of the international community, legally do what they want with their, uranium enrichment facilities, as it stands right now, outside of the deal. But what we do know right now is that they have been communicating with, European countries, saying that they're trying to find a way to basically stay within the deal without the U.S., being involved. But right now, it's a very perilous situation and one that has left the U.S. a lot less safe than it was just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm looking at this, and I was thinking about it last night, and go, we had more justification going into Iraq over the aluminum tubes than what Trump has pulled out, and again, I'm just mind blown by it. And I think Christine Amanpour had probably the best statement I've seen on it. She said, "I would describe pulling out of this deal as possibly the greatest deliberate act of self-harm and self-sabotage in geostrategic politics in the modern era."
No, exactly. And, this is something that the administration has tried to say should not have come to a surprise, since this was, something that Trump had promised on the campaign trail. But, at the end of the day, there have been a number of things that he has let sort of go to the wayside that he made on there. And, ultimately it's pretty safe to say that the one reason why he really doubled down on this was because, this has the added political punch of being a slap in the face to the Obama administration. And it's kind of hard to, divorce that reality from the decision. It doesn't necessarily seem like one that was made for any other reason except for political points.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. And you're right. There's no other justification other than Obama did it, so they have to undo it, even if people end up dying over it. And that's the unfortunate thing about this, because the conversation I had last night, I've got kids who are, my boy is 12, my daughter's 15, I've got another that's younger than that. And, we could be sending them off at some point down the road into who knows what he has just started.
I mean, one of my dark thoughts that I had to myself as soon as, John Bolton was named as the National Security Advisor was pretty much me being thankful that I'm not at an age where I could still be drafted.
Yeah, I mean, look, they were drafting people in their 40s during World War II. So I know you're not there yet. So you're not out of the woods yet.
Well, then too fat to be drafted. I'll go with that.
Okay, well, they'll get you into shape. They'll whip you into shape. But some good news today, right? The hostages were returned from North Korea. I mean, that's good news, and give credit where credit is due.
It is good news. This is coming on the heels of Mike Pompeo making a relatively unannounced trip to North Korea to meet with officials there ahead of the planned meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And this was secured after a lot of optimistic statements coming beforehand from the president and others within his circle, saying that it was just a matter of time before this was agreed to. This looks like a goodwill measure. We know that they're on their way home now. They stopped in Anchorage, Alaska for refueling, so they're now back, at least within American airspace. They released a statement thanking the Trump administration as well as the U.S. government as a whole, saying that they are pleased to be back and are, as happy as we would imagine this development to have left them. And today we also had Trump saying some additional, thoughts on this, going out of his way and saying that he appreciated Kim Jong-un for making this decision, something that, I don't have to tell you if this was Obama saying that about a hostile government would have not just been sort of blown off and would have been probably the big story of the day. But, regardless of all of that, this is a positive development and, one that is a cause for celebration, I guess. No,
and credit where credit is due. The interesting thing, though, is, some of the reports I've been reading coming out of South Korea is, the North Koreans are saying, don't give Donald Trump all the credit for this summit coming together. This was really the work of, not the Chinese, but also the South Koreans.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is a sort of foreign policy aspect that doesn't just exist within a vacuum. This came after South Korea, met with North Korean officials, came back and delivered the message that Kim Jong-un put forward there. So, this is something that you can't really downplay the level of involvement for South Korea, and they are certainly, deserving of praise in this.
All right, so let's move on. Some big news coming out of it. Yesterday we talked about I talked about, $1.1 million going to Michael Cohen. I guess it was $500,000 from a Russian oligarch, $400,000 from a big giant pharmaceutical company, $200,000 from AT&T. We're now finding out that AT&T was, a lot more than that, and who knows how much more bribe money, access money, hush money, whatever you want to call it, going through Cohen's hands. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that this is a rapidly developing story. We are learning more and more about this. Some of the big news that we know now is that AT&T was apparently contacted by Mueller, as were some of the other companies and shell corporations that were, involved in these payments, and are, pretty much trying to play cleanup, saying that they did not hire Cohen to be a lobbyist, saying that he was just basically a consultant, but have nevertheless come within the snare of the special counsel. So that's one of the big ones coming today. During the press briefing with Sarah Sanders, we tried to get some additional clarity on this earlier today, and this was pretty much brushed off as a matter for Trump's private legal team, despite the fact that, regardless of the Russian oligarch situation here, this still shows clear-cut effort to have Michael Cohen, a close associate of the president, working with corporations and basically using his connections to the president to try to, I guess, influence policy during a period of time where, there were big questions over the AT&T merger, Air Korea, the Korean aviation companies, efforts to sell contracts as well. So just a lot of big questions over how exactly this leads to draining the swamp, something that, is a White House concern, but we've had that refrain coming from the press secretary for quite some time now that, this is something that they are not going to be addressing, and something that she said today that they have made a conscious decision not to engage in, even though this raises questions about, good government itself and, how our system works, and goes beyond just the president's own private defense.
And you got to wonder how many of those other leeches are out there, and what Mueller's really looking at. I mean, again, following the money, and it's interesting that Stormy Daniels' lawyer is the one that's coming out with all of this stuff, which makes you wonder, how much. Maybe we should have put Stormy Daniels' lawyer in charge of this investigation.
Well, Mueller apparently, was on top of this. He had interviewed his companies long before Avenatti moved forward with the documents that he released yesterday. And that information did not leak, and that should be a pretty, big sign of how airtight of an operation Mueller's team is at this point.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it to all come out. I'm hoping it all comes out. And you're right, he has run an airtight ship, and I'm hoping that when it does, we finally get to the bottom of it. Let's move along. Evidently, you're kind of public enemy number one there, Justin. You press folk. Evidently, Trump wants to take your press credentials away. No more questions.
Yeah, this is something that Trump has been saying for quite some time now, this idea of pretty much banning the press from the White House, pretty much banning the people who are the ambassadors for the American people from a publicly funded building, which is, absurd on the face of it. But what was also a little bit shocking about this was, we tried to get some additional clarification today on this from Sarah Sanders, and her response was basically derision, saying that this has been the most open and transparent White House in history. People have commended them for the amount of, access that reporters have. And, to a certain extent, that is true. Trump has taken a lot of questions where, he was in situations that Obama just would not. But, ultimately, this was the press secretary mocking the press for asking a question based on a tweet that the president had given, based on a very direct threat. I'm not sure if the subtext here is that, the press should not take the president's tweet seriously. Certainly Sean Spicer and others within the administration have, publicly at least, said that you should be viewing these as official White House statements. So just a lot of mixed messages. But ultimately, at the end of the day, despite the press secretary trying to give a lot of reasons for why the White House has been so good to the media, there was not a straight-out denial that this is something that the president has considered both publicly and privately, which should raise a good level of concern.
So now, for me, someone who's been denied a press passes or press credentials, now I see lawsuits coming.
Yeah, I mean, so far they haven't done anything in this direction. There's been a lot of, scary talk going up against this, but this just plays into the larger theme that this is a, White House that wants to, I guess, antagonize the press for pretty much doing their job. There are countless times where what's reported ends up being true not long after, despite the fact that there's been initial denials. And, that's leading to a situation where a lot of White House officials are consistently left with the egg on their face and, sheepishly trying to claim that they didn't know what they said when they said it. And that's just a bad situation and is not good. And, as a lot of people have noted, these sort of attacks on the press have had global repercussions. There are more and more, dictators across the planet who are leaning on this fake news defense, pretty much inspired by Trump. And that is, just not good.
No, I mean, we used to be the shining city on the hill. Now we've got this authoritarian mindset, because I think it's the Philippines, right? They passed a fake news ordinance or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that, Duterte has actually openly joked with Donald Trump about when they were having their bilateral meeting, kind of playing off that. Trump has also reached out to a lot of other, leaders who have just not had a free and open press and have jailed reporters have been antagonistic towards the media. This includes El-Sisi of Egypt, who is a major strongman, somebody who is, known to jail his opponents and whatnot, known to push back against the press and, really crack down. And, he was pretty much welcomed with open arms at the White House, something that the previous administration had just refused to do. So it's a troubling aspect of, Trump's ad hoc foreign policy, wherein, he continually embraces strongmen, and they are continually embracing him, at least when it comes to his rhetoric.
Yeah, jailing your opponent, something Donald would love to do. That's the mindset. Scary.
I mean, that's not even guessing. That's not even an overstatement. That's something that he has, tweeted about time and time again. The fact that the DOJ should be focusing on this and this and this, and that people like Hillary Clinton or others, or McCabe or whatnot, should be punished and put in jail. And that's just a fact of the matter. That's not an overstatement. That's the terrifying situation that we're all in right now.
Welcome to America, 2018. Justin, I appreciate the time, man.
Thank you.
Our good friend Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. He's right. Scary times. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people on the talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1972. That was the day that employees at the Farrah Manufacturing Company went out on strike. The company was one of the top producers of men's and boys' pants in the country, and the second largest employer in El Paso, Texas. The majority of workers were Chicano. More than 80% were women. These workers worked long hours for low wages and were required to meet a high quota demand. In the late 1960s, some of the male employees began to discuss their working conditions and what they could do to change things. One employee remembered the early days of organizing sometimes happened after softball games between the teams of workers from the different departments in the plant. We'd sit around after the game and talk about these things and the union. Men working in the cutting room voted to affiliate with the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. Workers from the San Antonio plant came to El Paso to support the union effort. These workers were fired. In response, 500 El Paso workers walked off the job. They demanded the right to have a union. Soon, more than 3,000 Farrah employees went out on strike. The strike cause won the support of the Roman Catholic bishop in El Paso, who supported a boycott against Farrah pants. The AFL-CIO called for a boycott. The campaign against FARA soon spread across the country. Even though the company brought in scab replacement labor, the effort to get a union continued. The fight wore on until March of 1974, when the National Labor Relations Board found in favor of the employees who had been fired. Unionization had come to FARA. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Fargus with your World in 2 Minutes. World leaders continue to respond to President Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. In a joint statement, the leaders of France, Germany, and the UK, all signatories of the deal, observed Trump's action with, quote, regret and concern, and they pledged to uphold the nuclear deal so long as Iran also lives up to its commitments. Russia took an even harsher line. A foreign ministry statement said the country was, quote, gravely concerned the U.S. is acting once again in defiance of the opinions of the majority of states and exclusively out of its own narrow and opportunistic interests while grossly violating international law. The international law violated by the U.S. pullout is Security Council Resolution 2231, unanimously approved by the 15-member council, which turned the deal into a legally binding international agreement. And Kim Jong-un became the first North Korean leader to fly abroad in 32 years on Tuesday in a quick trip to China. But it was the substance of Kim's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping that deserves our focus. In a brief statement, Kim said he would take phased and synchronous measures to pursue denuclearization in upcoming talks with the United States. Phased and synchronous are key words there, since they suggest North Korea may not be willing to sign on to any flashy short-term pledges to fully denuclearize, which is what the Trump administration wants to see. Instead, Kim, perhaps with China's blessing, may only be willing to offer up small concessions on its nuclear program now and expecting the U.S. or China to do the same. And remember, Kim Jong-un will rule for life, and Xi Jinping recently abolished term limits. For all of Trump's bluster, it's what Xi and Kim agree on that may matter more in the long run. Luke Fargus, the United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists, you're bound to lose.
Well, the White House Correspondents Association, they released a statement this afternoon. And again, the last time I saw a statement coming out of the White House Correspondents Association, it was saying, sorry, we didn't know Michelle Wolf we didn't know anything about her. She's not there for our mission. Instead of backing her up and saying, you know what, free speech right here, Donnie. Nope, they backpedaled. But here they say, some may excuse the president's inflammatory rhetoric about the media, but just because the president does not like the news coverage does not make it fake. A free press must be able to report on the good, the bad, the momentous, and the mundane without fear or favor. And, you know, you look at this and you go, this is what authoritarian types do. Not surprising. It is what it is. And we knew this. Look, it didn't take a genius to figure out how Trump was going to act once he was elected president. Just kind of throwing that out there. The right wing knew exactly who they got, and that's what they wanted. So right there goes that. Some good news today, though. I mean, I don't want to be all down and all out. Bernie Sanders and a number of senators and a bunch of House members introduced the Workplace Democracy Act. And I wanted to talk about this a minute. Just real quick in that, I've been saying for years what we need to do is undo Taft-Hartley, undo the 60-plus year assault on organized labor and workers' rights to form and join unions, and to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, conditions, all of that. This does that. This is basically what Sanders is saying. End the no rights at work agenda, dumped these right to work laws, done, gone, bye. And look, the right wing doesn't have a leg to stand on. They can no longer cry, oh, states' rights. Can't do it. No more. When this Janus case is decided by the Supreme Court, no longer can they now cry that they believe in states' rights because, hey, they're going to bludgeon 22 states over the head with federal statute. So with a Supreme Court decision. So don't give me the states' rights nonsense. And I've been saying for a while, it's time for the Democrats to stand up and get behind workers front and center. And this is what I was talking about earlier with Ro Khanna. Look, I mean, a kind of a new deal, if you will. Massive investments in infrastructure, massive investments in job training, massive investments in future technologies, healthcare, education, all of this stuff. We need massive investments. And oh, by the way, working people need to benefit from it as well. It just seems to me that, at the end of all of this, we need to be, honestly and truthfully, we need to be active in pushing this. It's that simple to me. And I love the fact that Sanders is throwing this out there. Now, there's some who are saying, well, Bernie, you didn't reinvent anything. And no, he didn't. He just had the stones to go, you know what? We're going to write it down and put it on a piece of paper, and we're going to introduce it into legislation. Now, tomorrow, the day after, the next day, call your representative. If they are not on this list, if they are not co-sponsors to the Workplace Democracy Act, tell them they had better be. That's simple. Come November, if a Democrat is not signed on to this and is not promoting this, this is the litmus test. And I rarely do this. I rarely say anything about litmus tests, pledges, any of that stuff. This one is that important. This one is, where's the heart of the Democratic Party? What do Democrats stand for? This is one of those moments. I know a lot of people, we're FDR kind of Democrats. This is an FDR kind of issue. You go back to the original National Labor Relations Act, the original NLRA. And I've said this before, there's not a word, there's not a syllable, there's not a letter. There's nothing in the original National Labor Relations Act that is there for employers. It's there. That law is to benefit workers. It's to give workers rights. There is not one right in there in the original 1935 National Labor Relations Act that is there for the employer, because they understood that the employer has all the rights. They understand that and understood that the employer has all of the power. They decide when you come to work. They decide how long you're going to stay at work. They decide how much you're going to be paid. They decide the conditions. They decide how, what, where, when, how. They decide all of that. And the workers' only power in that is to fold their arms and march. That's it. The only power that they have is to say, I'm not working here. And this, the NLRA gave workers the ability to say, it gave them the right to strike, gave them the right to collective bargaining, gave them the right to engage in collective action, concerted collective action to better their conditions. And this is what Sanders is going back to. All of this stuff around having elections, all of this nonsense around secret ballots and all of this, that wasn't part of the original law. The original law was you signed a card, you got a majority of the workers on the job site to sign the cards. You began negotiating. You recognized the union. You began negotiating a contract. It was that simple. And when it was that way, 35% of the workforce joined and formed unions. It's what built the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. And right now they tell us unemployment is historic lows, 3.9%. But yet, I started the show with how much the CEOs are making. Never better. Things are great. Things are great for them. But average wages stagnant still. So where do you think those multi-million dollar, $12.1 million average salaries, where do you think, who's paying those? You and me are through lower wages. It's that simple. And this, again, is why collective bargaining is so important. Just that simple. So call your representative. It's that simple. Call them. Get on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share some of your thoughts on, is this the right thing? I want to hear it. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color.